Christopher Bollyn is an investigative journalist and writer. After finishing high school in Schaumburg, Illinois, he sauntered in Europe and Middle East before studying languages, history, and journalism at the University of California at Davis, Santa Cruz. He earned a degree in history with a focus on Israeli occupation of Palestine. After the first Gulf War, he led an international team of photojournalists on a trip through the West Bank and Gaza Strip. He has written in-depth articles about the Middle East, electronic vote fraud, the dangers of depleted uranium, and the history of geopolitical background in terror attacks of 9/11. He has been invited to speak at numerous 9/11 events across Europe and the United States. Please welcome Christopher Bollyn.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Nice to see a nice crowd. It's my second time in Seattle. I spoke here about a year ago, and it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Christopher Bollyn, and I'm the author of the Solving 9/11 set of books. And this presentation is, as it says on the sign, Solving 9/11 Ends the War. This is my protest, my one-man manifestation at the Academy Awards last February 22nd. As I said, I'm the author of the Solving 9/11 set of books. It's a set of books with the same title, different subtitles. The smaller book is Solving 9/11, The Deception That Changed the World. The larger book is Solving 9/11, The Original Articles. This is the little book, and this is my analysis, my thesis, presented in a concise, readable format. This, a little bit larger book, is The Original Articles. This contains all my articles that I wrote from September 2001 through April 2012 about the 9/11 atrocity. Atrocity. False flag atrocity. And this is my children's book, ABC Zoo, and this is a book of illustrated capitals and text. It's an ABC Zoo for kids. What do I mean about Solving 9/11, The Deception That Changed the World? Why the title? The first thing you need to understand is that the 9/11 crime was not meant to be solved. The 9/11 crime was not even investigated as a crime. So when I realized this as an investigative journalist back in 2001, I started turning my energies towards solving the crime and covering the aspects of the crime that the media was not discussing. Because there were certain aspects of the crime from the very beginning that were obviously being omitted. My credentials are basically that I was an investigative journalist working in Washington, D.C. in 2000 and 2001. I remained in that position until 2006. And prior to that, I earned my degree in history. My specialty was the Middle East. My emphasis was on Israel and Palestine. And then before all that, I grew up in suburban Chicago, in Schaumburg, Illinois, where I was an Eagle Scout, and I received the God and Country Award from Scouts. The photograph here is from my presentation at the Citizens Grand Jury in California in Los Angeles in 2004. So the question is, some people ask, why does 9/11 truth matter? It's 14 years ago. They thought the crime was solved. Many people thought so. The government produced all kinds of documents. They had a commission, and they went to war. They fought the wars. They killed the bad guys. It's all over. What are you talking about? Well, it's not quite so simple. A good comparison is the murder of President Kennedy. So why does the murder of President Kennedy still matter 53 years later? Well, the murder of Kennedy still matters because it was a coup d'etat. The powers behind the assassination then took control of the government and orchestrated the cover-up. And in a democratic state like the United States, where a coup d'etat is kept secret, this means that the succeeding government is in fact illegitimate. As you know, the United States was involved in Vietnam from 1955 to 1975. But the real uptick occurred after Kennedy was killed in 1963. The Kennedy assassination still matters because the United States government continues to support the lies of the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission, of course, says that it was one man, no conspiracy, behind the murder of Kennedy. The Kennedy assassination still matters because the mainstream media continues to support and even endorse the official version. And the Kennedy assassination still matters because when the government supports the lies about the murder of the president, it means that the powers that killed President Kennedy are still in charge to this very day. This simple graphic shows you the percentage of the American people the light green line, who believe that there was a conspiracy to kill the president. And the dark green line is the number of people, the percentage of people who believe the official version, the Warren Commission. So, likewise, why does 9/11 still matter 14 and a half years later? For many of the same reasons. 9/11 matters because the government continues to lie about what happened to this very day. These two administrations, for example, have led the cover-up. And 9/11 matters because it was a policy coup. That the policy coup of 9/11 brought us the war on terror and took us into a series of disastrous wars, primarily Afghanistan and Iraq, but also including Somalia, Yemen, Libya, Syria, etc., etc. 9/11 truth matters because for 14 years the mass media has promoted the lies about 9/11 and the fraudulent war on terror, all the while suppressing the very real evidence and facts that disprove the official myth. If the government and media are lying to us about 9/11, it means logically that they are controlled by the very same people who carried out 9/11. This is a very important statement because it gives you good indication of how very serious our political predicament is in this nation today. This means that media owners like Mr. Murdoch, who owns Fox News and News Corp, these people who have promoted the 9/11 myth and the war on terror are themselves complicit in a criminal fraud, along with the very terrorists who bombed the World Trade Center. And people like Mr. Murdoch are actually created by banksters like Mr. Rothschild there on the other side, who create these media moguls in order to control public opinion. The whole name of the game is basically a psychological warfare operation against the public, and to get us to support their war agenda, or whatever agenda they have. But in this case, we're talking about the war agenda. And as you know, the war on terror began 3 weeks after 9/11 in October 2001. And this war on terror agenda is still going very, very briskly, almost 15 years later. Here's the latest phase, of course, in the war on terror. This is this Islamic State organization, a very dodgy organization of mercenaries primarily. I read just recently that something like 12,000 of the men in this organization are paid mercenaries, which is why they all wear these face masks, because they want to hide the fact that they're Malaysian or Indonesian or Chechen or whatever. Their identities are being concealed for a reason. These men are not Syrians or they're not Iraqis. They're mercenaries. What's interesting about this is that most of the information about this group comes to us through the media, and the media gets its information from an Israeli intelligence website called Site Intelligence Group, which indicates that this organization and Israeli intelligence are very closely connected. Here we see, this is the woman who runs Site Intelligence Group. At the other picture on the top, the picture of these men kneeling, you see the logo, Site. That's the logo of Site Intelligence Group from Bethesda, Maryland. This woman, Rita Katz, is the woman who runs, she's an Israeli intelligence agent. She runs, in Bethesda, Maryland, this Israeli intelligence website, which, as I said, funnels the videos. They bring the videos from ISIS to the media. They sell them to their subscriber list. And here, when the second American video of the American being beheaded was shown, she spoke on CNN, and she admitted that, in fact, within a short time after our release, after her group released the images, ISIS account on social media indicated that within a short time they would be releasing the video. Only we actually had that video beforehand and were able to beat them with the release. See, so this Israeli intelligence website had and released the video before the group of perpetrators had actually released the video. You ask yourself, how does that work? This is from the most recent video showing some of the men that were involved in the attack in Paris, and they put together some images and video basically to solidify in the mind of Parisians and French and Americans that in fact ISIS was behind, this terror group was behind the attacks in Paris. This is all very reminiscent of the movie Wag the Dog. Produce the video, produce the narrative, show the video, show the narrative to the people, and they'll believe it. 9 times out of 10, they'll believe it. This is 9/11. This was the seminal event of our time. This is what we're talking about today. New York Times on the following day. And there's this quote next to it from the former director of counterintelligence from the U.S. State Department, Larry Johnson, who he's speaking about the sophistication, he's discussing the sophistication of the 9/11 plot. And he says, we don't have anything in history to compare with this. The only thing that comes close to it is a former Soviet intelligence operation. This is the position of the New York Times regarding this very sophisticated operation. This is 3 years after 9/11. This is the lead editorial. It's entitled The Public Knowledge of 9/11. And the New York Times, the editors of this B'nai B'rith newspaper, a family-owned newspaper, by the way, by the Sulzberger Ox family, says, in the 3 years since 9/11, we've begun to understand that it's possible to know what happened without knowing what happened. Now, this is unacceptable, like he says. This is unacceptable in a democracy, in a republic like ours, in New York City, that the largest newspaper in New York City should say that we basically don't understand what happened and we don't expect to understand what happened. You just all get used to the idea that you don't know what happened and accept it. And at the bottom they say, some of what we need to know publicly has been provided by the 9/11 Commission report. Other answers are lacking. Now this is just the attitude that the New York Times took. And this is indicative basically of how all the mainstream media in this country has treated 9/11. They have not investigated the crime. They never did. The U.S. government didn't investigate it either. What the U.S. government basically said was that when they attacked the Pentagon on 9/11, that was an act of war. And they treated it then as an act of war by 19 Arabs, and they went to war based on that. They did not investigate the crime of 9/11 as a crime. So 2,700 people were killed in New York City, and that debris, that rubble, that evidence was simply destroyed. There was no criminal investigation. Here we see Building 7. This is the third tower that fell down that day. This fell down at 5:25 in the afternoon. It's a block away from the World Trade Center. And this building was owned and built by Larry Silverstein. It was in fact an Israeli constructed building. And it was a block away, and at 5:23 in the afternoon, it fell straight down into its own footprint. The important thing about this building is that it was not hit by a plane. There was no reason for this building to fall. So for many people who are just getting into the 9/11 understanding of the lie, this is the event, this is the thing that gets their attention. People like Richard Gage and Stephen Jones in Utah. This thing is what got them asking questions. Well, I don't know how many of you believe or don't believe the official version, but if you don't believe the official version, you are in company with about 60% of the population. The green segment, this is a very conservative graph, about 40% of the American population does believe the official account, according to this poll. According to polls done by New York Times and CBS, however, from the very beginning, they found that in 2002, that 73% of the population believed that the Bush administration was mostly lying or hiding something. Ergo, they were not being upfront and straight with the public. That number increased over time. In 2004, it went up to 76%. In 2006, it went to 81%. And when they found in 2006 that only 16% of the population thought the administration was telling the truth about 9/11, they stopped doing the poll. But you can see that the tendency is towards greater skepticism. As more information comes out, more people become aware, more people understand that the government has lied. These are some statements from people who actually wrote the report. This man was the senior counsel. His name is John Farmer. He was the senior counsel for the 9/11 Commission. And what he wrote in a book shortly afterwards is said that what government and military officials told Congress, the Commission, the media, and the public about who knew what when was almost entirely and inexplicably untrue. And these are the two commissioners, Thomas Keene and Lee Hamilton. And Thomas Keene said, to this day, we don't know why NORAD told us what they told us. It was just so far from the truth. So you can see that the people who actually produced the 9/11 Commission report have admitted to the public that it's based on false information. Well, after 9/11 happened, I was writing in Illinois. I was writing from home. And I was writing from the very beginning, questioning the official version, because I could see that the official version was being presented to the American people. The media and the government were giving us a narrative, but they were omitting certain key pieces of information. They were omitting from the very beginning two aspects. One, they were omitting the fact that there was evidence of explosions at the World Trade Center prior to and during the collapse. And two, they were omitting the fact that there were scores of Israelis who had been arrested in conjunction with the 9/11 attacks.